Everyone. Hello, everyone. We are live, and I can see that the attendees are flooding in. We are excited to welcome you all here. I'm Chetna Kapoor from Seed Global Education. We are a UK headquartered company that facilitates connections between leading global universities and prospective students like yourselves. Our mission is to connect aspiring students like you with faculty and admissions team from top universities, allowing you to explore the programs they offer and make informed decisions about your higher education or career goals. For those of you who are already here, if you could quickly post in the chat box which city or country you're dialing in from so that I can figure out where people are joining in from. There is someone I can see from Ghana. There are people joining in from Kerala, Chandigarh, Pakistan. We have a few from Pakistan. Lebanon, there's someone from Lebanon. There's someone from Jammu, Guwahati, and Delhi. That is amazing. We are around over 100 people right now. Welcome to today's webinar hosted by the New York University Tandon School of Engineering. NYU Tandon, an institution with a legacy dating back to 1854, is the second oldest private engineering school in the US and is based right in the heart of Brooklyn's Metro Tech Center, a buzzing hub for innovation and research. Ranked 38th globally, it offers cutting-edge programs in engineering, computer science, and excelling at top companies, with graduates excelling at top companies like Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. Known for innovation and career-ready education, NYU Tandon is where leaders are made. I'm especially excited about today's masterclass because we are kicking things off with how to stand out in the NYU Tandon MS admissions process. You will receive expert advice from NYU's admissions director on crafting a standout application and getting to know Tandon's unique programs. But that's not all. We'll also give you a sneak peek into what a faculty-led class at NYU Tandon feels like, with a mock lecture on the future of data integration and remote sensing by Dr. Lefer. We'll explore decades of innovation and how these technologies are reshaping industries like agriculture, urban planning, and disaster management. If you are ready to learn, innovate, and stand out, this session is for you. We are currently around almost about 200 people on this webinar. Let me quickly introduce you all to the panelists today. We have Liana Kovales, Director of Enrollment, Marketing and Recruitment at NYU Tandon School of Engineering. With over 15 years in higher education, Liana has spent the last 7 years shaping Tandon's graduate recruitment strategies. We are excited to have her guide us through today's session. Hello, Liana. We also have Dr. Deborah Lefer, a professor at NYU Tandon with expertise spanning engineering, historic preservation, and art history. A pioneer in remote sensing and sustainable construction, she has over 160 publications, 4 patents, and global recognition, including honors from the Royal Irish Academy's Women on Walls project. We are thrilled to have her hosting today's session. Hello, Dr. Lefer.
Hello.
Before we get started, here's a quick question for the audience. We'll be launching a poll on your screens. Please take the next 30 seconds to respond to that. Question is, wait, I think this is the wrong question. Charam. Okay. When are you planning to pursue your postgraduate degree? Is it in 2025, 2026, or have you still not decided? Please take 30 seconds to just select the answer. I will now close this poll and we'll see the results. 56% are planning to pursue their graduate degree in 2025. And some of them are still undecided, like over 20%. Well, Liana will now take you through the key strategies for navigating the NYU Tandon MS admission process and offer valuable tips on how to craft a standout application. Over to you, Liana.
Thanks, Chetna. Let me just share my screen here. All right. Thank you everyone for attending our session. We are so happy to be here speaking with you. Chetna did a great job of introducing some important things about NYU Tandon. I know that we've been having a series of webinars over this semester, and so I'm sure some of you have attended and heard some of this information before. But I'm really just going to be focusing today on applying to NYU Tandon, and as Chetna mentioned, some recommendations and tips that I have for you as you put together your application. Many of you may know that our priority application deadline of December 1st is coming up. Also, it is our PhD deadline. And then our regular deadline will be on February 15th. So you still have time to put together both of your applications. All right, so let's get started. As I just mentioned, our deadlines are laid out here for those of you who may have wanted a spring start. Unfortunately, that deadline has already passed. But if you're looking for next year, maybe spring 2026, it will be around the same time, which was November 1st. I get a lot of questions about the priority deadline because a priority deadline can mean different things at different schools. So for us, our priority master's deadline of December 1st is an important deadline to remember. And the way that I tell students to think about it is that the most important thing for any application anywhere, including NYU Tandon, is that when you submit it, you've put together your best possible application. And this can mean a lot of different things. It can, we'll talk about all the different pieces of the application coming up. But if you feel like you have had time and energy to put together your best possible application by December 1st, then you should definitely try to get it in by December 1st. For some of our programs, this will give you a slight edge in your admission. The way that a lot of our departments look at these applications is during the first deadline, they will automatically, they'll admit the top half of the students or the students that they know or they want in the class, and they'll reject a group of students. But there are some students that they will hold and not put a decision on until they see who else applies in February. So the greatest advantage for this deadline is that you get an answer early on. But the other advantage, again, is that you get to be first in front of faculty. So we get over 12,000 applications a year. And you can imagine that after reading that, reading thousands of applications, some of them start running together. And it's a little bit harder to, differentiate between the candidates. So that is one of the main advantages of getting it in early. So, but if you need extra time, if you need to improve your grades, if you have not had time to ask your recommenders to write a good recommendation letter, or you need a little bit more time to work on your essay, it's completely fine to also submit by the February 15th deadline. But again, to summarize, if you can get your best possible application in by December 1st, then I encourage you to do so. Otherwise, it's fine to wait till February 15th. All right, so we're going to start talking about some of the application requirements. Our application is quite convenient. It's all online, so you can and once you fill it out online, you will get a checklist of all of the items that I'm about to talk about. So you don't need to write all of these down, or if you do and then you lose where you put them, it's fine, because once you start the application, you will have a very clear checklist that you can go through online. The first thing is that we do have a $90 application fee, but for all of you who have attended this session, we will send out an application fee waiver code. This is a code that you'll enter close to the beginning of your application. It is not on the payment page, it's a little bit before, so just keep that in mind as you're going through the application. Now, one of the most important parts of your application is your GPA and the courses that you've taken. And this comes from your official transcripts. So our preference is that if you have official transcripts from your university, that you send those to us either by mail, or some universities can send those electronically as well. However, I know that many of you are probably still in your final year and may not have those transcripts available yet. In that case, it's okay for you to upload copies of your official transcripts for your decision. And then after you've been admitted and you receive the final diploma and the final transcripts, then you would need to submit those to our office. These need to be from all previously attended institutions. So if you're currently in a master's program or a certificate program, we also need your current transcripts as well as your bachelor's degree transcripts. And like I said, we can accept copies, but we will eventually need the officials when you enroll at NYU Tandon. The other thing I wanted to say here is that we get a lot of questions of people who are concerned about their GPA. This academics are very important. We are a competitive university, but we do have a comprehensive review of our application. So all of the different pieces of the application are going to play into it. We also have a variety of different programs. We have over 31 programs, and some of these are more competitive than others. So I always encourage students, if you think you're a good candidate, and also even if you just have the program that you truly know that you want to get into, that you have been preparing for, that is kind of your goal. A lot of times we're also looking for students who are very passionate about a subject, who are going to be a good fit for the program as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about how you can show that in your application. Now the GRE is a test that many of you are very aware of. It is actually optional for all of our programs. This used to be a required exam for all graduate school programs, MS and MA programs, but during COVID, a lot of universities waived this requirement because it was so hard to get for students to get to testing centers. And since then, through a lot of research we've done at the school and other universities have done, there hasn't been shown to be a huge correlation between a strong score in the GRE and success once you get into graduate school. The greater correlation is between your grades as a bachelor's degree student and your success at graduate school. So we have taken out the GRE requirement and focused more on the academics from your bachelor's degree. Now, I get a lot of questions from students asking me, will they get an advantage if they submit their GRE score? I will say this, you will not get an advantage just for submitting a GRE score. When we required the GRE, our average score of our admitted students on the quant section was 165 out of 170. So it was a very high quant score. The verbal score was around 155, 156 average for admitted students. But that quant score was very important. I would say if you have to, first of all, if you don't have to take the GRE for any other school, please don't worry about it. Don't take it. All of our departments have developed systems of reviewing applications where they don't need the GRE. If you have to take a GRE for another university application and you get a quant score that is close to 170, in that situation, it may help your application, but that would be the only situation in which I would suggest that you submit a GRE score. Otherwise, remember that it is optional for all of our programs, and so it's one thing that you don't need to worry about. We also require an English language exam. You can see we've listed TOEFL, IELTS, Cambridge, PT, Duolingo. We accept all of these different English language exams from students. We do have a process in which you can request a waiver of this requirement. However, we do not waive the requirement if you have been instructed in English. So the only times, like for example, I remember Chetna said there was a student from Ghana here. So if you are from Ghana or Nigeria, those countries, the only official language in those countries is English. And in that case, we would waive the requirement. However, in India, there are many different official languages, and we have found that students, even when they're instructed in English, may not have a strong enough English level to be successful. And so we do require an English language exam for students from India. Some students have another situation. For example, maybe you studied in, the UK or Australia for your bachelor's degree or for high school or something like that, or you've worked for a while in one of those English speaking countries. That would be a situation in which you could request a waiver from this requirement. The scores for both of these exams need to be sent directly from the testing agencies. Even though you can submit unofficial transcripts, you cannot submit unofficial test scores. The other thing, okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is the resume or CV. This is actually an extremely important part of your application. This is a place where you are able to write down basically the highlights of what you have done in your life, whether it's work experience, research, internships, volunteer experience. You're able to lay out in a document kind of the outline of your qualifications. This is used in general pretty regularly by the faculty who are reviewing the applications to just get a snapshot before they dive into the rest of the application. They can see this is where this person went to school, this is the research they've done, if there is any, this is the work experience they have, and then they can go into the rest of your application with an idea of who you are. So when you're putting this together, just keep in mind that you want to that from that perspective, that the person looking at this is going to see it as kind of a starting point for your application. And then we come to the essay, which of course there are many questions about. For our application, we have two prompts that you will need to answer. I've talked to many different faculty reviewers about this portion, and it is a very important part of the application. Like I said, especially since we no longer require the GRE for the application, faculty are really looking into these essays to try and get a better sense of who you are and how you are going to fit into their program. They want to know basically a brief outline, what are your goals? Why are you choosing the NYU program? What do you think you can bring to the program, and how is this program going to help you achieve your goals? A graduate school essay is not, if any of you applied for an undergraduate program in the US, a graduate school essay is a little different. They don't want necessarily a whole emotional journey about your life. One of the computer science faculty I talked to said that sometimes they'll get essays about, oh, I fell in love with computers when I was 4 years old and I got one for my birthday or whatever. Like, they don't need to know your whole life story, but they do want to know how you got to this point. Like, why are you applying to graduate school at NYU? Another thing is that many of you probably are and should be applying to many different programs, but that doesn't mean that you submit the same essay to every single different program. We sometimes will get applications and essays that say, it's always been my dream to go to Columbia University. That's great. We are not Columbia University. And so that doesn't always look great when faculty are reading that, trying to figure out who they want to admit to their program. So just be straightforward, talk about like what you know about the program and why that's exciting to you. Even if there's something about coming to New York that has been part of your goals, part of your life dream to come, that's also something good to mention. And again, another very important thing to realize is that you've already provided a highlight of who you are. You've already provided, a list in your CV or resume, an outline of what you want us to know about you. You do not need to repeat that in the essay. That's a waste of space. You have only a few places in this application where you can add new information. So I would, if you are going to use some of that stuff from your resume, I would use the essay as a place where you can expound upon something. So if you did an interesting project, that might be a good place to say, you know, I did this project in this course, and it really increased my desire to learn more about electrical engineering or something like that. Or I did this project in a course and definitely convinced me I do not want to do that. And that's why I'm now applying to this other program. So you can expound more upon different things in your resume, but please don't use the essay as just a repeat of what you've already put. The last thing I wanted to mention before we turn this over to our esteemed faculty member is the recommendation letters. Now, recommendation letters sometimes are looked at as a throwaway because, you know, we get 12,000 applications. We require 2 letters of recommendation for every application. So that's 24,000 recommendation letters we're reading. And the majority of those are basically, this student was a great student in my class, they'll be successful at your program. That's a very fine recommendation letter, and it definitely fulfills the requirement, so you can check that box. But this is another place where you can this is another piece of your application where you can add to the story you've already told if you're careful about it. So one thing that I will recommend to you is that as a person who has written a lot of recommendation letters, it's very helpful when you ask your recommender to write about a specific thing. So if you are talking to a faculty member who you've worked closely with, or whose course you've taken, it's often helpful to be like, I did this project in your class. I would really like you to mention this project in your recommendation letter. Or, you know, we did this research and, you know, I got a good grade in it. Could you please mention that? Something like that is very helpful. And then it can say something more specific than just this student was a good student in my class. We know sometimes people think that the more prestigious the person who wrote the recommendation, the better chance they have of getting in. And that's also not necessarily true. You know, maybe you know the president of the university, or your father does, or your mother, or somebody. We don't necessarily care how prestigious the title is of the person writing your letter. What we care about is how well they know you. And so try and build relationships with people in your academic setting so that they will be able to write a good and really substantial letter about you. All right, and then just to wrap it up, especially those of you who are applying to PhD programs, there's also a section where you can add like a supplemental documents. This could be a paper you've written, a project you've done, something like that. But you don't need to include every certificate you've ever earned, every piece of paper that you've ever had. This is just for very specific like academic achievements that you want to highlight for the faculty. So I hope this was helpful. This was a quick run through of our application requirements and some of my recommendations. I'm happy to answer questions later on in the Q&A, but I'll turn over the session now back to Chetna.
Thank you, Liana. That was very insightful. We now have a much clearer understanding of how to navigate the application journey and what makes Tandon's program so unique. Dr. Lefer will now give you a glimpse of a NYU Tandon classroom experience through a mock lecture on the future of data integration and remote sensing. We are over 300 people on the webinar right now. So over to you, Dr. Lefer.
Thank you very much. Let's see. I tried to answer one of the questions in the chat and I didn't do it right. So I put the answer or in the Q&A and I put the answer in the chat. So if you're looking for information on that construction management program, please take a look at the Q&A. So, all right, well, so nice to speak to everybody today. Thank you so much. My name is Professor Deborah Lafer. I have affiliations both with the Department of Civil and Urban Engineering and with our Center for Urban Science and Progress, which can be kind of thought of as a program for big data for big cities. I teach a number of classes, and I thought it would be nice to just have a little bit of a sampling of a couple of them to give you a flavor of some of the things that you might be working on at NYU. Oops. So I consider myself an urban engineer. I've got formal background in structures and geotechnical engineering. I've been working in remote sensing, predominantly in laser scanning, or known as LiDAR, both from the ground and from the air since about 2003. So it's about 20 years now. And my work is really to generate data and models for other engineers. For those who might have a computer background, you can think of myself as kind of on the back end, or the back side of the house. And I'm really interested in kind of investigating what I call district level problems. So these aren't things, citywide, but they're bigger than just at a particular property or maybe even a block. So I usually work at about a 1 square kilometer scale, which gives us a lot of opportunity to have variety and differences in different parts of the model. So a lot of my research, and therefore a lot of things that I teach, might relate to segmenting and object detection, developing traditional algorithms, but also machine learning and deep learning. How do you integrate the data storage process so that it's something that's actually helping you in both the querying and in the processing of these large data sets? I do a lot of work in the subsurface, and I do a bit of work, usually with a partner, on things like identifying solar potential, trying to look at pedestrian wind comfort, flooding, these kind of typical urban district level problems. Uh, it's been amazing to me what's happened in the last 20 years. Sensors that used to cost $250,000 are now available for, really 1/10, if not even less than that. It has completely changed how we do things and also what we can teach and deploy in the classroom. We've seen miniaturization of things that are much faster. We now have edge computing. So you basically have real-time data acquisition, quality control. Uh, Everything, when I was a graduate student, you had to wire everything. So things got run over in construction sites, and wires got broken and things like that. Now everything is also integrated in terms of a GPS and integrated cameras. A lot of these sensors and things are so light, they're under 500 grams, so we can put them up on drones. And really, there's been some new tremendous opportunities in bathymetry, which is kind of the underwater version or nearshore version of laser scanning. We see a lot of multi-sensor technology out there, including hyperspectral. And there's a lot of things that we used to throw away as part of these data sets, that either the metadata or other more raw versions of the data that we are now incorporating, not only just for research, but part of larger workflows that are going back into industry, that are spawning startups and innovation. So it's very exciting. There's still this big transition going from kind of 2D data to 3D data. And then obviously with machine learning and deep learning, although there's been a huge amount of stuff in imagery and natural language processing, on these 3D data sets, there's still a lot of work to be done, and we don't even have really good training data sets for many of them. Here is a quick preview of one of my most recent data sets. So this is taken from about 300 meters in the air from a helicopter. This is a small part of my current study site, which is out in Southwest Brooklyn, so about 20 minutes from our campus. Uh, it's kind of an exciting mixed use environment. We've got some big industrial buildings. There's a major highway that goes through it. There's kind of mixed use industrial and housing. And this area has been going through a huge amount of kind of rehabilitation and renovation. There's also a waterfront here, and we now actually have a new ferry stop that brings you quickly between Lower Manhattan and Brooklyn in just a matter of a few minutes. So all sorts of exciting things happening in this community. Um, we've also been working with students and communities to try to do more in the area of subsurface documentation and education. A lot of times we're dealing with problems, let's say flooding, and our flooding models don't really take into account the complexity of our urban environment. So we can see here in this middle shot, this fellow's looking down and he's using this lightweight laser scanner to get documentation about this kind of subsurface area. It's not, it's visible from the street, but it's so small that when we do our hydraulic models that it's often not being captured. But you can imagine if this area starts to flood, this whole part is going to fill up, right? So it means that A, there's less water on the street, but the other thing it means is that anybody who lives or works down here or has property down here, this stuff is at risk. But if we don't put it in the model, then it's harder to identify where those risks are. We took our laser scanner down into a subway station, and I think it's really exciting when you look at something like this. So this is the output from that. So this was done with some students, and basically at the far right side, we entered from the street, we came down into what's like the ticket area and kind of this mezzanine area. Directly below that is where the rail engineers use to control the trains. And this entire long subsurface passage, which runs the entirety of a block, is actually the subway station. A lot of times we have I think, a poor understanding of volumetrically how much space is being used underground. We then took our units and we brought them above ground and also just took some quick images here so that you get a bit of a sense of the scale. So this is in downtown Brooklyn, very close to the campus. And you can see some of the buildings are quite high and gives you a sense. So we've got kind of 2 stories here and about 20 stories here. Okay. Ultimately, this is the kind of thing that we're going towards. What we're trying to abstract some of that data and create these underground 3D models. These are actually catch basins. So if you've got water flowing down the street, you want it to go somewhere, and you usually on the street level see a little grate, and underneath it is usually some type of concrete box or cylinder where the water flows into, and then it connects to the sewer pipe system. Here you can see there's a little hydrant. So we're trying to kind of build out an underground utility system here. You might think, oh, isn't this stuff all documented? Some of it is, some of it isn't. Some of these pipes and things date back, hundreds of years. New York City started putting in a water system back in the late 1700s. The gas system started going in the 1830s, and we've had major electricity since the 1870s. Our subway system was largely constructed at the very end of the 1800s and beginning of the 1900s. And what's happened over all of these decades is some of these things are no longer in use. So people used to send a lot of telegraphs. So there used to be telegraph wires. Well, those wires are still in the ground, and so are the conduits in which these wires are there. And they become problematic. Both they're taking up space, and maybe they get mistaken for a live line, and then you accidentally, doing excavation nearby, actually hit the live line because you thought, oh, I think I know where the live lines are, and you've missed it. Also, there's an opportunity for some of these to repurpose these lines. So it's really important that we get a better documentation and that this is shared both between the utilities and with our Office of Emergency Management, as well as people who are doing capital planning. Um, as part of this, we often do work with different communities. Here is an example of where our graduate students went out and trained some of the high school students in this local community in Sunset Park. The community has a high percentage of immigrants who are Mandarin speaking. And so here, the young people in high school are actually teaching their grandparents about underground utilities. So this was kind of fun, but the graduate students kind of helped put together some of these games, kind of an underground bingo, underground Jeopardy. So this is an example of some of the outreach that we've done where we have hired graduate students to help us with projects. Um, Flooding is a big problem in many communities, and the question becomes is how do you not only model it better, but how do you communicate that flooding? So what we did in this project was we came up with a way of taking those laser scan, those 3D point clouds, and connecting it with an imagery program and what they call a flood filling program. And so we go out, we scan a local neighborhood. Here's an intersection. We pick kind of a water model that um, we digitize that. We say, okay, maybe in one direction the water's going to go this way, and in the other it's going to have a little bit more of a roughness to it. Um, and then we are able to go out into the community and kind of show them what their community would look like under a different level of hurricane flooding. So here we're trying out a couple of different patterns. This one on the left didn't look very realistic, so we went to this pattern more on the right. Um, and so in many of our times, our students get a chance to learn these kind of techniques where they're really not just learning to work with one piece of software or one type of data, but really trying to integrate them because that's really where the future is. The ability to get things to work together. We have a lot of fantastic technology, but that integration or that boundary between domains and between technologies still remains a major challenge in most fields. And then we're able to show this water rising. So it was really interesting when we first showed this to some local community groups that work with flooding. They said, please don't show this. We said, why? They said, because you've made your water blue. And we have a real problem when we have flooding. People think that it's like, the ocean or it's a bathtub or something, and they go out and they play in this water. But what this is that the sewers have actually backed up. So there's all sorts of terrible things in this. So based on that kind of feedback, we then changed this. So it ends up being kind of dark and gray and not very attractive looking. Um, One of I guess the last project I'm going to tell you about was when you have a situation where there's no design guidance. So most engineers, particularly people involved in mechanical and electrical and civil, there are codes, there are standards on how to design things. But what if you're going to design something that nobody has ever designed? Where do you start? What if we're going to design something on the moon or Mars or at the bottom of the ocean? And there are no standards. How do you start designing things like this? And so we were asked to put together a little project to look at minimizing wind drag variability on highways. So you've probably noticed that along a lot of highways, and certainly when I've been in India, at least in Delhi, I've seen quite a few of these kind of highway walls. And so since we're already putting them in as safety separators between the road and communities and to reduce noise. We said, well, let's think about, can we attach something to them to decrease this wind drag variability? The idea is that autonomous vehicles are becoming more and more common, and we want them to run efficiently. And therefore, having this kind of minimal drag is a big step towards that. So our initial intervention concept was this introducing this built element that would be attached along these sound walls, right? So we did no standards of guidance. There are no examples. And, where and how do you start a project like this? So we kind of broke it down into 3 components. We said, okay, we're going to go out to an existing roadway and we're going to do some scanning. We're going to acquire the geometry of an existing environment where we might want to do this intervention. So we go out and we scan it, we register that data to the local coordinate system, and then maybe we simplify it. Maybe there's some noise. We might, kind of take some noise out, and we might kind of just harmonize a little bit of it. Because what we want to then do is take this, we're calling the reference geometry, and we're putting it into CFD, so computational fluid dynamics. So these are computing meshes that we use for fluids, we use for airflow. If you want to look at how pollutants travel through an environment, you might use this. And so we're then taking our base geometry from the laser scanner, we're creating this computational geometry that is being imported into a commercial program. And now we want to try a lot of things. And so what we want to do so that we can try lots of different kind of options is we want to set this up in distributed computing, right? We have a fairly small run, but we want to do hundreds, if not thousands of them. So we want to parallelize this. And then ultimately for each of those examples, we want to do drag estimation, okay? Now, we're going to pair this with an evolutionary algorithm. Some people refer to this as genetic algorithm. So we have to select one, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But what happens is that we use this EA, this evolution algorithm, to pick a set of characteristics that go into these little waffles or baffles on the side of our walls. We're attaching them in this CFD model. We're running the CFD, and then we're seeing, oh, how good was that model? And based on that model, do we want to modify it? And if so, how do we want to modify it? For those of you who are familiar with the evolutionary or genetic algorithms, you'll have to close your eyes for just a second. The way they can work and the way we implement it is, think of it as you've got 2 parents. Each parent has kind of a DNA sequence, and that in your offspring, each offspring's going to have a little bit of the mother, a little bit of the father, and that's kind of where you start. You then do your analysis, and it is not necessarily looking for the absolute best result, but a good class of results. Okay, so here is our physical environment. This is about 20 minutes from the campus. What's nice and what made it easy for us is this is kind of below grade. So we could stand up here on the street level and scan down and not have to get too close to the traffic. This was our target area, and you can see when we scan from a lot of different vantage points, and we end up with a pretty big data set. But what we wanted to do is kind of clip out just this section. Okay. We then created our computational model, and you can see we just cleaned it up a little bit, made it a little more simplified. We then used a standard, what they call the Ahmed car, which is often used in computational fluid dynamics to model the drag of a situation. we put in 3 little cars. Our target car was 1, and then we put 2 cars in front of it to try to increase the uh, veracity of that model. We then picked design parameters, and these parameters are the parameters of the intervention thing that we want to design, our baffle or our waffle. Okay, and you can think of them just in this case, we just put a kind of just like a solid, almost like a shelf on the side of these walls. So we knew it could be of a certain length. We said, okay, it needs to be at least 2 meters long, not longer than 20. The width had to be controlled. We couldn't get it too far out into the highway, right? But if it was too close to the wall, it probably wasn't going to have much of an impact. How thick is that little shelf? How high off the ground? They're obviously not continuous, so, how close do you have them together? Are they straight? Are they rotated around the x-axis? Are they rotated around the y-axis? And then, so we pick a range for each parameter, and then we create what they call a step increment. So if we look at length, the first thing we would test is maybe something with a 2 meter, and then the next we would choose is a 6 meter, and then a 10 meter, all the way to you got to 20 meters. So you can imagine that for each of these, there's a certain number of step increments and a certain range. And then when you put them together, if you tried each one, every combination, right, it would be n to the n. And that would be a huge number of things to try, right? So instead, we take that kind of DNA approach, right, where we're picking a few from here and a few from there, right? And now we've got these children or candidate models, and we're starting the model, the evaluation model in the CFD with this handful of candidate models. Okay. And what happens is we very quickly get down to a relatively few number of potential candidates. So here's our mesh in the CFD. And if you've ever done any finite element or similar stuff, you'll see that the mesh is much more dense and close around our object of interest, and further in our system, in our space, we're not so interested. So our nodes, our mesh is much bigger out here. Okay. So this is looking down on the car, and this is looking on the side, right? So this is the sky at the top, and we're really interested in what's happening here at the car level. We first did a study to see how many nodes we needed, right? Because we wanted to do a sensitivity analysis with that. And here's some initial examples of what's coming out. So obviously where it's red, there is more drag, right? We're most interested in what's happening in our third car. And then we're applying all of this into that evolutionary algorithm and our CFD. And so each of these spots represents a single run of the CFD in our parallelized, high speed computing environment. And we're looking at the cost of the thing versus the drag, right? And we said, okay, for us, there's a certain hard line, here we don't want things more or less. And you can see that initially we get some things that don't make any sense, that they're just too expensive. And quickly the model starts to then narrow down to a better set of objective functions here. Okay, so this would give you a little bit of an example of maybe some stuff that I would be teaching, both in my guided research programs, but also in our major infrastructure class and my graduate class on subsurface New York. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lefer. That was incredible. Your expertise in bridging technology with real-world application has certainly given us a deeper understanding of the trends shaping the industry. We have a lot of questions in our Q&A section. around how to craft a compelling resume. Liana, I will take this up with you. What skills do you think matter, and extracurricular activities, are they really significant in the decision review process?
Yeah, so I would say that for the resume, it's a little bit, again, an application for graduate school is a little bit different than if you're applying as a bachelor's degree student. For example, when you apply to a bachelor's degree, it's very important, all your extracurriculars, to mention all the different things you've done, whether or not they're related to the subject you want to study. That's not entirely true as a graduate student. You need to be more focused when you're applying for a graduate degree because the faculty may not care that you took 2 years of fencing or were in the chess club. They may, but I don't know if that is worth valuable real estate on your resume. So what I always will recommend is to, obviously you need your education, you need any work experience, but then I would put on there in your education section any information about like certain projects you've done, research that you've been a part of, any groups in the school you've been a part of that have led you down the path to graduate school. So for example, if they're we want to know how you got to where you are and why you are planning to study this topic. I see, Dr. Leifer, you have a suggestion as well. I'd love to hear it. Yeah.
Yeah, I see in our Q&A that one of our candidates has written, I have a bachelor's in mechatronics engineering. I built a CNC milling machine as my final project from locally sourced materials from scratch. It works perfectly with a cutting precision rate 98%. Um, I score 3.43 on a scale of 4.0 using Wes evaluation. All right. It's things like that that excite faculty when they see, gosh, a student has really committed themselves. They can bring an idea from kind of just a great inspiration to actually physically doing it and then succeeding. It's lovely things like that that we adore seeing on resumes, in essays, because it speaks to you and your passion and your involvement and your dedication. And these are the things that I think get us really excited.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great example. The other thing I was going to mention is that, a lot of you may have done, volunteer work in your community or something like that. That's really great. But as kind of what we were talking about is like some of the things I see on resumes are like, you did volunteer work, but your volunteer work was going into maybe a less privileged community to help students learn about programming or to learn about, some of the things that you as a student are an expert in. And so that anything where you're using your skills, your talents, your passion to help your community, or any projects you've done, something like that. So just to summarize, I'd say make sure that it's tailored to what your interests are, and why you're applying to grad school. That kind of stuff is going to be really important and set you apart. Also, Chet, no, one more thing. If you were going down a path, if you were going down a computer science path and you have a whole bunch of programming things, you can include those, but it's okay to say, actually, these things convinced me I do not want to do computer science, that I want to go this other direction. So that also tells your story, something that tells the story of how you got here and why you're passionate about this particular subject.
All right. All right. That answers the question. Dr. Leifer, this is my personal question actually. How can professionals from non-engineering backgrounds contribute to the field of remote sensing?
Yep. So we have a master's and PhD program called Urban Systems. And this allows people from architecture, policy, law. We had one student from public health. A lot of our students are architects and urban planners, so they're kind of in adjacent fields, and they want to get more technical expertise, and they want to have a bigger toolbox to be more competitive in the market. And so within the Department of Civil and Urban Engineering, we have that track. I don't know how many other programs in Tandon have similar tracks. I know that master's degree from CUSP, from Center of Urban Science and Progress, does take about a third of its students from non-technical degrees. There's also the Bridge program, I believe, that they run, particularly in computer science. I think it's mostly targeted at computing security, but it allows students over the summer to take some, I believe, even free classes to try to maybe bridge some potential gaps. The world changes so fast, and, trying to stay up with market demands and be competitive sometimes requires a little bit of a pivot and a retraining. And I think that Tandon understands that and tries to accommodate that.
That's great. Liana, can you tell us a bit more about the leadership opportunities present on campus? Are there any startup incubators on campus?
Um, yeah, so we have a few things we talk about in our other presentations. We have what are called the Future Labs. This is a public-private partnership with New York City itself. And there are 4 different labs, or 3.5 different labs right now. These labs are not exclusively for student use. These are for community use. Basically, businesses can apply to these incubators to receive support in terms of financial, but more in terms of advice and personnel to help get their startups off the ground. Often these companies do need manpower to help get their businesses up off the ground. And in that case, we have a number of student on-campus job positions that are available in these startup labs. So that is an option if you're coming to school at Tandon. Once you get here, you are able to work as a graduate assistant for up to 20 hours a week. And these jobs at the Future Labs, when they have openings, that is something you can apply for as well. So that's definitely an exciting opportunity that we talk about a lot for our students. But in addition to that, we have plenty of options for students who have their own ideas, maybe not developed enough to apply for an incubator program. But for example, we have a lab called the Makerspace. In the Makerspace, every semester they have money that you can apply for to fund your own projects that you kind of want to get up off the ground. We also have a variety of different competitions throughout the year that you can apply for funding for your projects. We have a space called the Greenhouse where students can get together to support each other with their own innovation and ideas. So there are a lot of opportunities outside of those incubators for students to be able to develop their own projects and own ideas. In terms of leadership in general, we have many different clubs and organizations on campus that are available for students to get involved in. And I saw Professor Leifer was kind of having something to say as well.
Yeah.
So I went through one of the boot camps for one of these innovation labs, and it was awesome. It's free. It was so fantastic. We had a project that we were trying to bring to market. We'd gotten a patent on it. We were really struggling. It helped us completely rethink how things were. And then we decided it was the wrong time to enter the market, but it allowed us to pivot and go and get several $1 million more in research funding. So that was hugely successful, and I can't recommend them higher. I just want to address one thing I've seen in the chat from a couple of people. They were asking about coming or applying to NYU for PhDs without a supervisor. When you decide to take a PhD, it's a huge commitment. And this is not to discourage anybody, but I just want everybody to kind of take a moment to think. You are applying to move halfway around the world, commit yourself for 4, maybe 5 years of not getting a lot of money, in terms of earning, and working really hard and really long hours. If this was a job, you would never do that unless you'd met your boss and your coworkers. But people do this for PhDs all the time. And it often does not have a great result, because then maybe the expertise they want is not really what the faculty can offer, or the faculty don't have money in this area, or maybe that person's going on sabbatical or they're retiring. So if you're serious about applying for a PhD, even if this means sitting out a year, take the time to figure out what truly in your heart you love and who out there is doing that kind of work. You will have a much better chance of getting funding, or not only getting admission, getting funding, and finishing. The sad point is that around the world, no matter what department, that on average about 50% of all PhD students never finish. And I think a lot of them, because they don't have the right advisor, they run out of money, and they end up working on projects that they're really not that excited about. So think about it as a job, and uh, and do it when you're really ready. So
All right. Thank you, Dr. Leifert. Liana, I'll come back to you again because there are many questions around standardized tests and the minimum requirement for it. People have asked about TOEFL, GPA, GRE, IELTS. So if you can throw some light on this and how many years of experience, if there is any, required for any of the programs at Tandon School of Engineering.
Yeah, there's a reason I didn't mention any minimum requirements, and that's because it is not a incredibly important thing for most of the things you mentioned. For the English tests, it is the only important thing. So for example, for the TOEFL, you have to get a 90. We get questions about, well, what if I get a 120? Does that increase my chances? No. This is just a minimum threshold that you have to meet, which is a 90 on the TOEFL. I think it's 7.5 on IELTS. I don't remember all the minimums for all the tests, but that is listed on our website. In terms of GPA, we tell students that our minimum is a 3.0 out of a 4.0 scale, but that can really vary. Like I said, we have over 31 different programs. Some of our programs are much more competitive and they won't consider someone with a 3.5, and some of our programs are less competitive and they'll happily consider someone with a 2.75 or something like that. Obviously, those are not an Indian standard. And again, the reason I'm not providing specific minimums is because that is, again, there are no hard cutoffs. It's not like the English test where the only important thing is the hard cutoff. Those other things are, the GPA requirement is more fluid, and and it really depends on what program you're applying to. So I'm not going to go through all 31 of our programs and talk about the different competitive natures of those. But that is something that you can email our office directly to ask about. But our stated minimum, our public minimum is a 3.0 out of 4.0 if you need to know. In terms of work experience, none of our programs require work experience. Most of our students come out, most of our students come out straight from a bachelor's degree, although many of them have 1 to 2 years of experience, some have 10 years of experience. So it's really, graduate school is one of those things where a lot of people are going for a lot of different reasons. And so sometimes it makes sense to come straight out of a bachelor's degree, and sometimes it makes sense to wait 3 or 4 years before you know exactly what you want to do. But there's no requirement.
That is correct. Dr. Leifer, there is someone who wants to know the structure of the academic year and how does the semester system work at NYU? If you can.
I would say it's similar to every other U.S. university and many of the foreign universities. We start the beginning of September, we go to late-ish in December. We have a J term, which offers special extra programs and opportunities, and then we resume usually somewhere between the 25th and the 28th of January and go to through usually about the 10th of May. The summer is then, for most master's programs, a time where students do internships. Some students will stay and do some type of funded research, but most of our students, particularly between year 1 and 2, if it's a 2-year program, will try to get some work experience so that they are more attractive in looking for a full-time position.
Okay. Eliana, there are many questions around scholarships and any on-campus scholarships that are provided. If you can throw some light on that.
Jenna, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave you. I've got to get to another meeting. So nice to meet everybody. I wish everyone good luck. I think that if our Indian and other Florence students reach out to people from their community who are at NYU, that they will generally find that the students who are here are happy and having great experiences. So I encourage you guys to think about applying. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Lateful.
you. So scholarships, in terms of scholarships at NYU Tandon, everyone who is admitted to a program is automatically considered for scholarships. These scholarships are merit-based scholarships. They're not full scholarships, but partial scholarships. And you would receive a notification of those about at the same time as you would receive your admission letter. In addition, we're also offering some special seed scholarships. These scholarships, I believe, are around 20,000. And so this would not be in addition to whatever merit scholarship you received, but it would be replacing whatever, if you received, $5,000 from us, this $20,000 would take the place of that, the much larger scholarship. So you would choose to go with that one instead of our 5,000 merit scholarship. In addition, as an international student, you're able to work, as I mentioned, 20 hours per week on campus. This is not a scholarship opportunity, but it's another option to help fund your education. These jobs can be anything from a research assistant to work in our office. We hire about 40 different students. And our rate of pay is one of the highest in the country. I believe it's about $29 per hour. Obviously, this will cover your tuition, but it will help with living expenses and incidentals.
All right. I have one last question for you, Liana. There are people who are asking about the career paths available after graduation. If you can share insights on the opportunities that NYU Tandon graduates can explore and how the university supports in building successful careers in their chosen fields.
Yeah, so again, we have 31 different programs. So we have many, many different career paths coming out of NYU Tandon. One thing that is this focus on your career outcomes, though, is extremely important to us. We have NYU itself has a nationally ranked career center, and in this career center, you have a lot of different resources available to you. Some of them are just building blocks for career searching, like helping you put together a good LinkedIn profile, how to use LinkedIn appropriately to connect with employers, building a resume for the different types of jobs that you might be applying for, taking professional photos, that sort of thing, doing interview workshops. So there are a lot of tools that they can help you build to be successful in the job search, but then they also do a lot with connecting you to future employers. So they will have a database that you can look to search for different job opportunities, but they also bring employers to campus to connect with our students, host several job fairs throughout the year. We also host students to attend conferences, student academic conferences that also include career fairs. A lot of students are able to meet with companies there. So that's what a general career center does, but that Career Center does have an office on our Tandon campus that serves our STEM students. But a few years ago, again, this issue is so important to us. So we created a second office called the Tandon Career Hub. And this office does some of the same things, but it is specifically only for Tandon students. And it provides a slightly more personal level of service. So for example, a couple years ago, when there were a bunch of layoffs announced towards the end of the school year at, I believe it was Amazon, the Career Hub reached out individually to every student they'd been working with who had gotten a job offer at Amazon to see if they still had their offer, if they needed help finding another job, if they needed, guidance on that path. So it's a very personal level of service if you connect with them. They'll also do things like help negotiate benefit packages, things like that, just really provide you with the context of how to find a job, and they can help you with personal career counseling throughout the process. And then again, this issue is so important to us that several departments have hired a career specialist within their own department. So for example, our financial engineering program has multiple staff members that are specifically working with their students to help them find internships and jobs. this not only is important because of the mission of the university, but it also goes into our rankings. Right now, from our latest survey data, we have, I believe, 98% of students have found employment from last graduating class within 6 months, or they're in another graduate program or have started their own business. So at least the data we've collected shows that we've been very successful in our efforts to help students find jobs.
Thank you, Liana. You have answered every question so patiently and so nicely. As we wrap up, I'd like to thank everyone for their participation. We are still 160 here, and it's been over an hour. We hope you gained valuable insights into the unique opportunities that NYU Tandon is offering, and the programs and the community that will support you in achieving your career aspirations. A special thanks to our panelist, Dr. Lefer, who had to leave early, and Liana for sharing their expertise and experiences. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.